Hello, my pretties. It's the Queen of Lions here. Now we're at episode 150 of Shadows and Pretties. So today I am going to be doing a Shadows and Pretties episode. And this we're going to take a look at this movie, and we'll also take a look at the story later called The Blue Lagoon. Now this movie came out in 1980, and it's a romantic drama survival drama film, and it was directed by Randall Kessler from a screenplay written by Douglas Day Stewart. And this is based on the 1908 novel by the same name that was written by Henry D. Stackpool. Now, before I get with, the whole big thing about the movie, this movie came out in the 80s, and wow, I mean, it's a really good 80s movie from what I've been told personally. So, I definitely would have to sit here and say this right now that this honestly was a pretty amazing movie for what this is. Now, why is it amazing? Well, mainly because it came from the 1980s. You know, in the 1980s, you don't get movies that are just as good as these, like romance movies nowadays. However, the ones from the 90s were pretty good as well, like Titanic being one of them. But that's a James Cameron film. Now, there is a couple of different films about this movie. There is the one from 1923, which is a silent film. There is one from 1949, and I've not seen that one, so I don't know that one. And then we have the one from 1980. There is a sequel to it called Return to Blue Lagoon, which I'll probably, review it maybe, I don't know, maybe the next episode or something. I really don't know. And then there is a Blue Lagoon The Awakening. I think that's like a sequel or something. But yeah, there is 5 films based on the novel. So I'm going to go with the novel of basically what the story is about, but after I, go for the plot of what this movie is about. Even for so that way, for those who haven't seen the movie in like a long time and probably want a refresher or have not seen the movie, I'm going to sit here and basically go through that. Now, I'm going to warn you guys now that there is going to be some sensitive topics that are been described into it. Mainly, I'm not going to go too much into detail in some of them because they're not ad friendly for one, and two, you will have to watch the movie to know more information. So, anyways, this was released on June 20th, 1980, in theaters by Columbia Pictures, and the film was panned by critics who disparaged its screenplay, execution, and etc. So, with that being said, I think we should just go ahead and, explain what the movie is about. So it takes place in the late Victorian period, where 2 young cousins named Richard and Emmeline, who are, cousins, I believe, and they have a gallery cook named Patty, who survived the shipwreck in the South Pacific and reached to a lush tropical island. Patty takes care for the children and forbids them by law from ever going to the other side of the island, as he had found the remains of the human sacrifices on the altar. He also warns them about eating the deadliest scarlet berries, as Patty eventually dies later after a drunken binge. But of course, the children are alone, and they have to go to another part of the island to rebuild their home. When Richard and Emmeline reach their puberty age, their experience is stressful given the lack of education on, puberty. Emmeline eventually experiences her, desire attraction to Richard. I can't really say certain words that what I mean because, some of them being, it's a certain subject matter that, some of it is not ad friendly. I'm definitely going to say that now. How about she becomes uncomfortable and declines to share her funny thoughts with him? She gets frightened when she ends up having her first period and refuses to allow Richard to inspect her for any imagines of a wound. Now, eventually, Richard recognizes his own attraction to Emmeline. He secretly ventures to the forbidden side of the island and sees the altar. She associates with the blood on the altar with the blood of Christ, saying that it includes the altar is God. and he tries to pursue Richard to go to the other side of the island to pray with her, but Richard is shocked at the idea of breaking the law, and the two eventually argue. Eventually, Richard tries to, kind of start going at it with Emmeline, but of course she buffs him as the result. So eventually the ship, for the first time in years, they see, but Emmeline does not light the signal on fire, and the ship passes without noticing them. When Richard angrily confronts Emmeline about the failure, she asserts to Richard's disbelief that the island is their home now, and they should remain there. So Emmeline reveals that she knows about Richard's, desire, and threatens to tell her Uncle Arthur about it, but they fight it. Eventually, Emmeline then throws a coconut at Richard and hitting him on the head. Richard eventually kicks Emmeline out of their shelter, so Emmeline accidentally eventually steps on a stonefish, and weak from the poison, she pleads Richard to take her to God. So Richard carries her to the other side of the island, places her on the altar, and offering a prayer, Emmeline recovers and Richard admits his fear of losing her. After Emmeline gains her ability to walk again, the two swim in the lagoon, and they swim to shore. Eventually, Emmeline and Richard discover their desires, and they become lovers. Yeah, I'd definitely say there's some inbreeding kind of talk going on in this movie, even though they're cousins. But I mean, it's actually a really weird movie as well from the 80s. Like, it's a weird movie from the 80s. So if you've seen the movie, you'll probably know how weird certain things are. But like, I honestly I'm not going to go too much into detail exactly of what they're doing or something. But let's just say that as a result, Emmeline eventually becomes pregnant, even though neither of them recognize the pregnancy. Instead, they're stunned when they feel the baby move, and they assume that it's her stomach causing the movements. Months later, Richard is alone in the shelter and hears from the altar, goes to the other side of the island, where he discovers the group of indigenous people performing a ritual in front of the statue as a ceremony. Now, during which they sacrifice someone, Richard becomes frightened and runs away to find Emmeline, who he finds Emmeline in labor, and she gives birth to a baby, which they named Patty. Now, a ship led by Richard's father, Arthur, approaches the island and sees the family playing on shore. When they notice the ship, Richard and Emmeline then walk away instead of signaling for help. Content with their lives as they are covered in mud, their appearance is more difficult to determine. Arthur assumes that they're not Richard and Emmeline. Eventually, one day, the family takes a lifeboat to visit their original home site. Richard eventually searches for bananas, leaving Emmeline and Patty on the boat. Emmeline does not notice that Patty begins to bring a branch of scarlet berries onto the boat. Emmeline and Patty slowly drift away, but Patty tosses one of the oars off the boat. Unable to reach the oar, Emmeline starts to shout for Richard, and he swims to her, while he's followed closely by a shark. Emmeline then throws the other oar at the shark, striking it and giving Richard the time to get to the boat. But the boat isn't caught on the current and drifts out to sea. So after drifting for days, Emmeline and Richard wake up to find Patty eating the berries that he had picked. Hopeless, they eventually eat the berries as well, laying down to await their death. Eventually, a few hours later, Arthur's ship arrives and finds them, and Arthur asks if they're dead. The captain then assures them, no, they're asleep and they're alive, and that's how the movie ends. Now, this movie is pretty different compared to the book. I mean, it kind of had, followed the same plot and all that, but there is, a few things that were different in this. So, eventually, right here, we're gonna sit here and say this right now. Now, instead of, the cousins or anything like that there is Emmeline, who becomes an orphan and a heroine, and there's Emmeline's cousin, Dickie. Now, basically, they're both cousins yet again. The names are all the same, except for Emmeline, Line, and Richard's son, or aka Dickie. Son's name is Hannah instead of Patty. Now, I know that's one of the differences that I actually see in the novel compared to the original movie. So, the plot basically is kind of the same, except the only major difference is that Richard's name is Dickie instead of Richard. I think they changed that. Well, it's basically kind of the same thing, but the D word, but Richard has like a couple of short forms for Richard. So basically, 2.5 years after the ship, Patty dies from falling from drinking, and the kids survive on their own. However, this right here is 6 years past, and Emmeline and Richard grew into mature adults and begin to fall in love and all that. But they do not understand how to express to each other. Eventually, the author describes their lustful encounter as having been conducted just as birds conduct their affair, and etc. Eventually, this one becomes pretty interesting, which he is very attentive towards Emmeline, listening to her stories and bringing her gifts. Over the several months, they end up going at it more than once. Often, eventually, Emmeline becomes pregnant, but the couple does not understand it. So, when it comes to the day, Emmeline disappears into the forest and returns with the child. So, in the movie, Richard finds Emmeline and helps her deliver the kid, but in the book, Emmeline goes and delivers the baby by herself and then comes back a few days later. I mean, that's another major difference that I did notice in the book that was not in the movie. So, I mean, that's kind of a little bit of a different sort of way how the book described. So, the book basically follows the same plot, except there are some differences. So, eventually, they survive a tropical cyclone, which they eventually survive later on in the book. However, somewhere back in San Francisco, Arthur, who is Richard and Emmeline's Richard's father and Emmeline's uncle, believes that the two are still alive, so they still determined to find them. They recognize a child's tea set belonging to Emmeline, which was retrieved by the whaler of the island. So Arthur finds a captain willing to take him to the island, and they set out. Meanwhile, everyone row on the lifeboats that they went to go to once they lived with Patty as children. Emmeline breaks a bunch of the deadly arta plants as Richard cuts the bananas on shore. Now, while the boat with her son, Emmeline fails to notice that Hannah has tossed one of the oars onto the sea, and the tide comes in and sweeps the boat into the lagoon, leaving Emmeline and Hannah stranded. Now, as Richard swims to them, he's pursued by a shark. Emmeline eventually, strikes the shark, earning, Richard to climb to the boat's safety. So, although they cannot go back to the shore without the oars or unable to retrieve them in the water because of the shark, the boat eventually gets caught in the sea, while Emmeline still grasps the archer branch. So, sometime later, eventually the ship comes along and they see the unconscious couple, but they're still breathing. The altar branch is now bare to save a berry. Arthur asks if they're dead, but eventually they're asleep. So that's basically kind of like what the plot of this movie, of not the movie, but the book really is. So I'm gonna definitely say there are a couple differences in this book that, Richard's name was replaced with Dick, and Patty's their son Patty's name is changed to Hannah, which is another for difference into the movie. That does not happen in the movie, but it's happened in the book. Also in the book, we also see that Emmeline gives birth by herself in the book, and then comes back later with the baby. But in the movie, though, Richard stays with Emmeline till they give birth. So, I mean, that's pretty much the changes. It's basically pretty much the same thing, except they did some changes, such as the characters' names and all that. So, I do like how this movie went out, especially with how great the movie concept really is. I really do think that, Brooke Shields does a pretty good job as, Emmeline. I think she's a pretty good actress, as well as Christopher Atkins, who did a pretty good job as Richard heard in the movie. I mean, it's a pretty good movie. I really like the acting of the characters. They actually did pretty good for what this movie really is. Now, this honestly, I really have to say this movie kind of had, there's some parts of it that was kind of cringe. I mean, there was parts in the movie that was quite cringy, but other than that, I do find this one to be, pretty good for what this movie is. It has a really good concept and a pretty good storyline. I mean, I'm really glad that they adapt this from the book, but they had made a few changes in the book that they did not include in the movie. Like there's a lot of changes that were in the book but weren't in the movie, like such as Emmeline giving birth by herself and then she comes back with the baby be a while later. In the movie, Richard stays with Emmeline until she gives birth. So I have to say, I mean, it's a pretty weird movie, but I still find it to be enjoyable. Especially this movie came out in the 90s, well, 80s actually. I apologize for that. It's a pretty good movie in to come out in the 1980s. I mean, there's a lot of good movies from the 80s, but this one honestly was pretty good. Shocking that with certain things at the same time. I still find this movie to be a really enjoyable concept for what this movie is. Yeah, I mean, it's messed up at certain parts, but I still found it to be, rather enjoyable. If you like movies from the 80s, then I recommend you check out this movie. I mean, you will not be disappointed once you watch this movie. It's a good movie that came out in the 80s. Of course, there is a sequel to it called Return to the Blue Lagoon, and there's a few other stuff that I do have intentionally have planned to I do have plans to review those movies, but I will have to rewatch them if I have the chance. So, yeah. I mean, I still find this movie to be, it's enjoyable. I mean, it's cringe at times, but it's still enjoyable. And I do plan to do the sequel called Return to the Blue Lagoon once I have the opportunity and the time to see it. So, yeah. I mean, this is just my opinion on the movie. I thought it was interesting, although there was parts of this that kind of made me cringe a little bit. But at the same time, it's still pretty good. But yeah, like I said, this is just simply my own opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these movies. You're free to state that if you don't like this movie, that's fine. If you like this movie, that's understandable. And as always, I'm gonna sit here and say, what did you guys think about the movie? Did you like the movie? Did you like the book? Did you like both? Did you not like them? And also, what we have done personally to help make the movie and the book a lot better. Feel free to leave me now what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you're brand new here to this channel, be sure to like. I don't know why I keep burping. I think I'm just gassy or something. That could be it. Be sure to leave a like. Hit the subscribe button if you're new. Ring the bell for notifications to when I upload. So that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out.